You are listening to NYC Radio Live. David Ellenbogen here. Great to be with you. Thanks for tuning in. You will not be let down. This is a fascinating conversation with Paul Winter. Paul Winter is a 7-time Grammy Award winner. He's got 40 albums under his belt, toured in something like 50 countries or more, and a lot of people know him as the spirit behind the solstice celebrations at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine. But more importantly, you'll see that he is a human being that seems to know what his mission in life is, and his view of what music is extremely broad, and it includes even the birds and the whales and the wolves, and that all became part of his story. And his broad view of music led him to work with cultures beyond what was considered friendly territory politically, and the music of the Balkans and the music of Brazil all makes its way into his music. So anyway, I think you'll really enjoy this conversation. Also, if you're curious, there is another archived conversation, my first chat with Paul Winter, a few years back at my old apartment, and all different stuff. I think you might want to look that up at nycradiolive.org. And yeah, hope you enjoy. Here's my chat with Paul Winter. Thanks for listening. Yeah, we had a nice chat last time.
Yeah.
And I got more questions for you. What's your take on how place influences music?
Big part of my adventures over the years has exactly been that inquiry. What would an experience, let's say, of the Grand Canyon evoke in us musically? And in that particular example, I went to fairly great lengths doing 4 river rafting recording expeditions through the canyon to just see what would come from it. Because my feeling was that if you're in an exalted state from the inspiration of being in some place in nature, perhaps you might play in a special way. And it's an interesting it kind of, when I reflect on both aspects of those adventures, in some cases we would, and in 3 of those 4 trips I took the whole consort with us on these rafts through the 3-week expeditions through the 290 miles of the canyon that the Colorado River traverses. And we would play each day in different places. And sometimes we would intend to create a piece that did something that evoked a certain place. And it almost always failed. And we would listen and say, well, that doesn't say anything about it. And then it turned out that Glenn Velez and Paul Halley and I went into the cathedral at one point and did some free improvisations, and one of them absolutely evoked the image of a Grand Canyon sunrise without our having any thought about it. So this is a kind of rambling answer, or not really an answer to your question. It's just a further kind of musing on that experience. I would think, I know that in an acoustic space, like the cathedral, it has a huge effect on my playing. And I play very, very differently because you have such a long reverb. And any note that you play has a magic to it because of the acoustics. So it's a tremendous enhancement of your sound. And so I tend to play more slowly and be glad for simple melodies, whereas in a dead space, you might be inclined to think that you should play something virtuosic in order to be, doing something of interest.
Yeah, and as well, you also kind of made a conscious choice to get out of the club environment.
Playing in small nightclubs is my idea of hell. It's like playing in a shoebox stuffed with cotton. Of course, these days, sound systems can mitigate that. And so you could probably go in any place and with the right reverb feel okay. But it was more than the acoustics in the clubs. It was the idea that you were basically a liquor salesman, that you were there to entertain people who came to drink and have a good time, and that it just wasn't. It didn't have the kind of encouragement to our playing that you get in a concert.
Right, or a canyon.
Or a canyon.
Yeah. So going back a little bit, so I understand that you were kind of scooped up by this titan of music, John Hammond, who people may know of being the guy who, quote-unquote, discovered Count Basie and Dylan and Aretha Franklin and Benny Goodman and Charlie Christian and many others, countless others. I think Bruce Springsteen even. Did you have much interactions with John Hammond? And what were your impressions? Yeah.
Well, John was the judge at the Intercollegiate Jazz Festival in Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. in May of 1961. And my sextet, my bebop sextet from college, we were at Northwestern University then, had entered a recording. This was a festival, unlike the Notre Dame Jazz Festival, which is the longest running and the most famous of the college festivals. All the groups don't come there as they do at Notre Dame for 3 days. They all send in recordings, and they pick the 5 they like best as to be the finalists, who then were invited to come to Washington and to play. Each group played for 15 minutes in the first half of the concert, and in the second half was Dizzy's quintet. And the judges were Dizzy and John Hammond. And our group won that festival and got a recording contract with Columbia, which was one of the prizes, which really totally changed the direction of my life. I decided not to go to law school that fall, and told them I'd hold my place, but I'm going to take a year off and try this music thing. And things just developed from there in an amazing way. That was in May. In December, John came to Chicago, where we were living, and recorded our first album. And over the next 2 years, we recorded 5 more albums for Columbia. So we were working with John all the time.
What kind of person was he? What did you?
Oh, John was pure enthusiasm. Denny Zeitlin, the pianist, my friend, who I also had gotten a recording contract for with John, we always joked that whenever you'd see John, almost the first thing out of his mouth would be, "Great!" Everything was great. He was a total, very positive guy. He loved jazz. I mean, he had been, as you know, a fan from the Vanderbilt family and grew up in wealth, and kind of went another direction from the people in his social strata and dedicated his life to jazz and justice for black people. This is in the 30s, and he was a deeply committed guy to the music and to humanity. I mean, he was a great inspiration.
Wow. And so you didn't get the sense, or did you get the sense, oh man, this guy is some kind of wealthy patrician?
No,
no,
not
at all.
I mean, he spoke in the manner of, let's say, his class, which was, I mean, he was, but it was not at all patronizing or, he was very down to earth and loved. I mean, he had spent a lot of time in the civil rights issues, and I mean, he had been working on all that way before it became so prominent in the 60s, and he was at home in all of the jazz clubs and the places in Harlem, and so no, he was a real mentor, and one of the great services he did for me was to open my musical realm to folk music. In the early 60s, in early 63, we were talking about what would be the subject of our next album, which was, I guess, going to be our fourth. And because folk music had become kind of vogue in that time, the idea came up to do jazz interpretations of folk songs. And I didn't know a thing about folk music, except for that the different cultures in Latin America that we had heard during the State Department tour that our sextet did in 1962. And he said, well, look, I'm recording Pete Seeger at Carnegie Hall next week. Why don't you come with me and sit in the control booth? And this was in early June, 63. And that was the album We Shall Overcome, which became the biggest selling album Pete ever did. And it was an extraordinary experience. And hearing Pete for the first time was, for me, a revelation. So that wouldn't have happened if it hadn't been for John.
Wow. And that, when I think of the idea that you were playing bebop early on, which kind of has a reputation of being a little bit of an insider's music, it's not something that it was like almost kind of developed for musicians by musicians initially. Maybe I'm, as opposed to the most music that tries to cast the widest net. Maybe you disagree with that assessment, but it seems like that this opening up into folk music really changed your orientation permanently.
Well, it was just one new facet of the ever-growing complexity of music in the world's music that I had been fascinated with. It felt like a natural progression. I mean, for me, the great theme of jazz is perhaps also the greatest theme of our country, and that is welcome. And that was the feeling that I got from the big band music that I grew up on in the 40s, the jazz scene in Chicago when I came there to go to college in the late 50s, and really from all the jazz, the various genres that have moved me. I mean, there's also some music that I feel is fairly introverted or just not, kind of excluding. But the great majority of it for me was, very simpatico. And so folk music was as well. And really, what it was more for me, what opened up the world was Brazil. And in the next year, '64, I went back to Brazil, where we had visited it for a month in our State Department tour in '62, and I was enthralled with the diversity of music there, and also with bossa nova, which was just blossoming. So I went back in '64 and spent most of the next year living in Rio and recording with that music, and that really made the major shift in my own playing and in the kind of ensemble I wanted to have. Because I kind of left the jazz scene after '63 and wanted to then, after I was in Brazil, have a different kind of ensemble that would also play quiet music. Everything we played in the sextet was loud, even ballads, and nobody used amplification in those days. So it was a loud, brash kind of music, and I loved it, and I still love it. But the João Gilberto's singing and guitar really had a kind of epiphanic effect on me. And also I heard cello a lot in Brazil with the music of Villa-Lobos, all of the diverse percussion. And so I came back from Brazil with the aural vision for the consort.
Well, it's so interesting. You know, I'm always excited when I get a chance to meet someone who is at kind of a birth of a music that has like solidified into an archetype, as bossa nova has. You know, so I guess you got to spend time with people like João and Vinicius de Moraes, and these guys were.
Well, I met most everybody in that. It was an amazing sort of creative crucible, and it was a very kind of small demographic, and it was really for a short time. I mean, it emerged in the late '50s out of the time of the music Orfeo Negro, Black Orpheus, and by '64, '65, when I was there, it was kind of over in terms of the community, but Vinicius was very welcoming, and he did the liner notes for one of the 2 albums I did there. I never spent much time with João. I don't know who has. I mean, he's the most introverted person that I've ever known about. But it didn't matter for me. I loved, what he did musically, and that was really the great key that opened the door to that new genre. But there were quite a few people I did get close with. I did an album with Carlos Lira, and I just went back there in February and did a reunion, a series of concerts with Carlos, who's now 85.
Wow.
The album was called Sound of Ipanema, and we did all of that music with an amazing sextet of Brazilian players, and it was wonderful.
Wow. So folk music and Brazilian music entered your sound, and this kind of that the dynamics and softness of Brazilian of bossa nova specifically, because I guess most.
Well, I wouldn't say that
music...
folk music entered our sound because we didn't sing. And
right.
We didn't play, although we did an album called Jazz Meets the Folk Song that grew out of that experience. I don't think ever played those pieces again. But I mean, the ethnic music of so many countries has been alluring to me, especially Africa, but also the Middle East, and I've spent a lot of time there, and Celtic music. I mean, the world is a kind of smorgasbord of music, and it was a tremendous boon to get to do the tour that we did for the State Department through 23 countries of Latin America, and realize that there's a much bigger world out there of music and beyond jazz, but that really for me, embraces jazz, and the labels get in the way, and so we've tried over the years to kind of sidestep them, and just sort of follow our musical instincts as to what felt alluring.
Right, and at what point did you start, getting beyond the realm of human music, and it started exploring the bird calls and wolf songs?
In May of '68, there was a lecture on whale songs at Rockefeller University by Dr. Roger Payne, the biologist who had recorded the whales and discovered that they sing these long, complicated patterns and then repeat them exactly. It's an extraordinary phenomenon. And I just heard it through a friend in New York about this lecture, and I couldn't imagine what he was talking about. Whale songs. What is that? What's that about? And that was another life-changing evening for me, because I was very taken with the poignant beauty of their singing, which goes through a huge range. It goes off the top end of our hearing and also off the bottom end, and a lot of it's swooping. They don't kind of land on the stair steps of notes like we humans do, not often, but it felt to me like a cross between Elephant Cries and Miles Davis. It absolutely had the poignance of blues, and I found that over the years, in almost all cultures and in many creatures, the yearning quality in their voices, and I've come to feel that it's a characteristic of a sort of universal characteristic of life. All life forms are yearning for connection, maybe to other members of their species, or yearning for who knows what. We'll never know what it is for the other species, but it's a quality that I find very kindred, and certainly there's been a lot of that in jazz and blues, but there are variations of the blues everywhere. And that night I realized that it was also in other creatures. So that I've always said that night kind of opened the door for me to what I now call the greater symphony of the earth.
And was it the sound that brought you into environmental kind of causes, or was it the other way around, or did it just all kind of emerge?
It has all been incremental. That night, the other amazing reality that I experienced that night was to learn from Roger Payne's lecture that, he demonstrated the whales. He played the recordings. He showed on a screen the spectrographs of two recordings of whale songs that lasted about 30 minutes, and they were almost verbatim the same. It was as complex as let's say a Beethoven symphony, and then they repeat the entire complicated song exactly. And all of the males, because it's the male whales who sing, all of the whales in that, the males in that area are singing the same song in that season. The next year you come back and put your hydrophone in the water, and they've got a new song, and they're all singing it. So that was astounding.
Wow.
To realize. And then to hear that they were being exterminated by a dying industry that was trying to crank out the last profits it could, whaling, to make products, every one of which could be made more cheaply from sources on land. And so it was absurd to think that these amazing creatures were going to be possibly wiped out. And so I kind of became an activist that night. I remember going up to Roger afterwards and speaking briefly to him and just said, if there's anything I could ever do to help out in this cause, I'd love to know. And so eventually, over the next year or two, I became quite good friends with Roger, who was a cello player, and he was interested in the fact that we had cello in the consort, and he let me have a number of tapes, and I looked for ways that we could incorporate some of the whales, the whale voices into our music. And that led to our being invited to play at different environmental benefit events, wildlife conferences and things. And eventually to get to go out and be with whales in the Pacific with Greenpeace after we did a benefit for Greenpeace in Vancouver. And they, after the concert, a couple of the guys said, well, we're going out on a training run tomorrow morning from Vancouver Island. Would you like to come with us? And I said, oh boy, would I? And so they put myself and a photographer in a small Zodiac raft, and we floated among the gray whales for a couple of hours, and that was fantastic. I mean, the gray whales are not vocal, but they're surfacing, they're feeding in that area, and to be near one when they surface to breathe and blow, which is an exhale, is unforgettable, because these whales were only like 60 feet long, but that in itself is 5 times as big as an elephant. And so the same kind of sequence happened for me with wolves. A fellow came to the middle school near the town where I was living then in Connecticut, and did a program with these 2 wolves. And it was a very impressive program, and we learned in that from him that the wolves are not a threat to humans. And that, again, just as with the whales, you have the Jonah story, so a lot of people think that if you fall in the ocean, a whale would swallow you. People came from Europe with the feeling that the wolf was the dragon of the forest, and there's never been an authenticated case of a healthy wolf attacking a human in North America. And so they fascinated me. At a wildlife conference in St. Louis where we played, I met a guy named Fred Harrington, who was a wolf biologist who worked up in northern Minnesota, where the last surviving population of timber wolves was living in a narrow strip of habitat near the Canadian border. And he invited me to come up and go howling with him. And we would go out at night into this Superior National Forest and howl. And most of the time, not hear anything, but once in a while, on a lucky night, we would hear a kind of lonely voice begin to rise into the night from fairly far away, and then the others would join in, and you'd hear this magnificent chorus. That was a high point for me, and so the wolves then became part of my life. And once you have entered nature, it's like the whole of nature is, in a sense, your home, or if not that, your field of play. And maybe it's similar to getting attracted to music when you're a kid, and you hear one kind of music, and before long you hear others, and you realize that there's a lot of different music. And and I think often the whole, not all music, but a lot of music can be of interest to you.
Wow. So that's I mean, I can imagine that's like it's so thrilling to make that connection when you actually get a wolf to respond or a bird to respond. And I would also think that like when your music starts transcending these traditional boundaries and you're concentrating on the glissando of whales or on the movements of the wolf call, suddenly a lot of artificial categories start falling away. The idea that bebop is so different from swing when you're incorporating whale calls into your sonic worldview. Starts seeing like an artificial division, and it seemed that is this your wide scope. Do you think that's why? I know that another important thing you did was work with a Russian group before the Cold War ended. Is there some connection there in terms of just getting beyond traditional boundaries and divisions?
Yeah, I'm thinking of an analogy to maybe food. If you like, if one likes various kinds of food, and then you go to wherever, Italy, you go on a trip somewhere else, and you sample their food, and you think, wow, that's really amazing. You could do that all over the world, and probably in most cultures find new culinary delights. It absolutely the same thing. I mean, the allurement to soulful sounds, which to me, jazz, though I loved the symphonic instruments early on growing up, it was the way that jazz players played instruments with a personal kind of voice that most was alluring to me as a kid. And if you hear the voices of the Slavic singers, the choruses where they're singing in these amazing tight harmonies that you can't really even transcribe, and they're singing with the power of like Stan Kenton's brass section, because the music is all a cappella, because drums were outlawed by the Orthodox Church in the 17th or 16th century. So the people learned to sing, to do all their music basically singing and dancing, and so their feet come into it. The rhythm of the dancing is sometimes part of it. But those voices, they just completely, they just got to my soul. It was definitely a feeling of the earth, I felt, and literally there. I mean, because the music evolved outdoors. It's one of the reasons I think why the people have these amazing horn-like voices that project a long way, and a lot of it's without vibrato. So it's very, to me, it has a lot of analogy to to a big band in jazz.
Mm. Interesting, yeah, and you were able to hear all those kind of microtonal kind of harmonies and that kind of stuff. You were able to get in there.
No. We this ensemble that you're referring to, the Dmitri Prokofsky ensemble. We were booked with them on a concert at Moscow University in September of 1986 at the end of a tour that we did of the then Soviet Union. And I had an experience with Balkan choral singing, which is in the kind of a similar Slavic tradition, from an album called The Music of Bulgaria in 1963 by the Philippe Kutev Ensemble. And I loved these amazing close harmonies and the general texture of the choral sound. It was not the sweet kind of suit and tie sort of harmony singing that you get from European and American choruses, much of which can be very, very beautiful, but it's a kind of a much more indoor sound to me. This felt raw and wild and amazingly artistic, and it just had everything that we love in jazz, with the harmonies, the voices, and the melodies, and it was dynamic rhythmically, and so we just fell in love with this group and talked about making an album together, which everybody thought was impossible at that time, but in the next year things opened up very fast over there. In '87 we went back and recorded them doing just what they do. Paul Halley, my colleague and great keyboardist and composer, wrote 2 or 3 pieces for them to sing, and that we could, in which we could accompany them, which we then recorded with them at that time. But mostly what we did with the 30 or so pieces of theirs we recorded was spend months improvising with them to find if we could create complementary pieces where we could do what we do full tilt at the same time they do what they do. But we weren't trying to imitate them or play their harmonies, but really trying to just find something that would be kind of a companion piece. And so that's what we from all of that came the album that we called Earthbeat in '88.
Nice. Well, so what should we expect? I know this is what number Solstice concert is coming up now?
It's the 24th Summer Solstice celebration.
All right, and you got something special lined up, I'm sure.
Well, we have a suite of new music for dawning, with a kind of unique summer winter consort with euphonium, which we're using for the first time, which is one of the lesser-known brass instruments that has a beautiful, warm sound. A young player from Colorado named Clark Goring. Bansuri, the flute of India, which you know, I'm sure. Steve Gorn, who's a master.
Great.
This instrument is studied there since 50 years ago. I mean, over the 50 years, he's been back many times to India. And Jeff Holmes is an extraordinary pianist. He's been head of the Jazz Studies department at UMass Amherst for the last 3 decades, and he's a titanic player. And Tim Brumfield playing the cathedral's organ, and John Hadfield, who is amazing percussionist who, in the tradition of Colin Walcott, who played with the consort early on, and then Glenn Velez, he's created a unique alternative percussion set, very different than a trap set with the kick drum and the tom-toms. It's full of diverse ethnic percussion instruments, and he's a wizard. And so it's a new ensemble, and we'll be doing new music, and kind of we approach this event as an opportunity for discovery. We try different combinings of the instruments, a lot of solos with players stationed in different parts of the cathedral, and it's a continuous stream of music for 90 minutes, beginning in total darkness, and then about the halfway point around 5:15. We started at 4:30 a.m. and around 5:15, the stained glass windows gradually illuminate, and it's a very unique kind of journey for the listener, because we don't often spend time in total darkness listening, and it's almost like a revelation, a whole new realm of experiencing can open up in your imagination, and we've tried to make the event as organic as it can be. There's no sound system, there's no lighting, no staging, no narration, just this ever-changing stream of sound, and it's unusual. Many people have never experienced this kind of a deep listening adventure.
Yeah, and I guess a lot of your listeners, they're not necessarily just people about music. It seems like you get a really wide range of people attracted to this kind of your events. Is it?
It's true. It's true. There are people with a sense of adventure, and it's a wide gamut. I don't know how I could describe the different kinds of folks who come. I mean, some people come from quite a distance around the country, because the cathedral itself is an amazing sort of destination place to come to. It's in a way, when you go in there and there's not a lot of light, you can't really see the ceiling, and you feel like you're almost in a canyon. And one thing I like about it very much is the sense of a shared journey that people have in that space, and the word welcome absolutely applies to the cathedral. As I said before, I thought it did to so much of jazz and so much of the traditional musics around the world, and I think people, just the effect of being in the cathedral is profound, and sound is perhaps the most effective thing in the cathedral. Talking is always problematic because it's kind of hard to really hear people well when you have a 7-second reverberation, as the cathedral does. And although talking is certainly still used very much as it is in any church, I feel that music has a very special role there. And we've been very lucky to have been given this forum years ago, and to be able to do these events that are, of course, totally secular. It has nothing to do with any kind of evangelical or whatever, a liturgical aspect.
Right, and so now it's kind of interesting that your life is kind of bookended twice a year by the solstices. You kind of and that they're in this magnificent place, which a lot of these churches are usually built on areas that were previously considered powerful spots, as that is at the top of Morningside Heights. But it's kind of interesting to me have your the rhythms of your life are kind of transcending the traditional daylight savings time Christian calendar, and the big event for you is the darkest darkest night or the longest day. I mean, do you feel like you're kind of in this natural cycle, maybe more than the rest of us, or that it's informing your music? Or
it's very interesting that you recount all that and sort of paint that picture. I don't think of it that often in that way, but you're right. It's like these are the two major milestones of the year, and have been for millennia for at least people in all the northern hemisphere of our Earth. Possibly the southern too, but the great majority of the population has been in the north. And until very recently, and I'm speaking in a large perspective, I'd say until the last few hundred years maybe, for the many, many thousands of years of our human journey, these were the times of year when they had the major rituals, because people didn't take it for granted then that the rounds of the year would keep turning. That let's say that the
sun would come back.
Yes, and that things would grow again, and there would be food. And at winter solstice, they felt that they needed to light fires and candles and have various rituals to encourage the earth to bloom again, and the days to get longer, and so because we now know that this cycling around the sun is what happens, and that probably will continue to happen. At least I've heard in some estimates for a few billion years. So we don't have to worry a lot about
one thing we can't screw up. Yeah.
Right. It's in a way we've lost that humility in the context of the world of nature and the cosmos, and so these events are a way that we can kind of wake up for at least a short time to the fact that we have this relationship with the sun, and we are part of an amazing relationship with our galaxy, the Milky Way, which in itself is part of a group of galaxies, which in turn are parts of what I've heard is billions of galaxies. So it's so vast that it's very hard for our small human minds to comprehend. But these are turning points of the year, and I think great times for reflection. And this event is really, we do it in the morning to welcome the first sunrise of the summer, to also kind of experience the great promise of the summer, and to feel some fullness of heart, in contrast to all the things that would keep us anxious and distraught if you happen to read a newspaper today.
Mm. It's funny that was exactly what I was thinking when you're speaking, that we're amongst a cluster of galaxies, which is amongst billions more, and it's all expanding. My thought was, so what are we worrying about?
I mean, it's a very good point. I think that there is something to be said to be able to resonate on a larger perspective. Enables us to have maybe a little more kind of tolerance for what's what's happening. In terms of the human experience, we have been here a very short time compared to all of the other species that still survive on Earth. And among the 15 or million or however many species there are, because they're not sure, we are the youngest. And we're barely into our adolescence, and because we've been blessed or cursed, as you look, whichever you choose, however you choose to look at it, with this amazing cerebral cortex that makes us so creative and so destructive also. We tend to think that we're special, and that we have some dispensation maybe among all the species to do what we want and to live in a ever progressive way, and yet we're destroying our home, which no species that has survived has ever done, and so we're in many ways quite deaf, dumb, and blind to what's happening and what we're doing. And so the creatures, to me, can offer us lessons, and these amazing times of year can give us a deepening perspective to this miraculous universe that we live in.
All right. Well, I think that's a good note to end it on. Always a pleasure talking with you.
Thank you, David.
Yeah.
And likewise, I wish you well with all your music making and all that you're doing, and I hope that we get to see you at one of these celebrations.
Oh yeah, I don't want to miss this one, so I hope to see you there. All
Okay.
right. Well, enjoy the day.
And you too.
Thanks, Paul.
Take care. Right, bye.